Okay, I didn't want to boom out too much. We do actually have to do this to time because there is a wedding in this room at 3 o'clock today and you're not invited. Amazing place, wonderful to be in here. In the room where they parked Robert and I for a while, the loo has a bath in it. I'm not sure if he's used it or not, but this is a sellout event. The one thing we can say about our next guest is he's anything but a sellout. I said earlier on that I don't think there's anybody else in this country who has done more thinking and developing the thinking about renewables and electric vehicles. You know, worldwide we've got Elon Musk, then maybe our next guest is a very, very close second. How about that for an intro, Robert Llewellyn?
I guess I should. Oh gosh, yeah. I suppose I should use this. It's just I'm in a funny place. I can't see anything now. I've just been dazzled by that. Thank you. That's ridiculous, Mark, and that's very sweet of you. And seeing as you've been driving electric cars way longer than I have, I think you anyway. Let's not even talk about it. Thank you for coming. I think we can tell from what's going on outside there today, what's going on in this country generally, what's going on around the world, is that we are at the beginning of a very major shift in a lot of the technology we use. I think there was a time when I would sort of try and predict it or think that maybe if these things happen it will happen. I think it's happening, and I think it's fairly obvious that that's taking place. The one thing that I always say when I talk about electric vehicles and the associated technologies that have arisen because of them is that electric cars won't save the world. There isn't a technological solution to all the problems we face, but it's definitely part of the solution. It definitely has a very, very important role, and its knock-on effects, I think, are what are really, really interesting. And I come from a place where I'm not particularly I haven't had a lifelong passion and interest in cars. For instance, like Johnny Smith, who co-presents Fully Charged with me, is a brilliant advocate for cars. He really understands cars. He knows about the history of the manufacturers. He knows all the people that make them. He knows why they were designed like they were. He has a really deep understanding of them. I can tell you what colour it is and how many wheels it's got, and then beyond that it gets a bit confusing. So my interest was very much started from an engineering point of view. That's been a kind of lifelong interest of mine, and I was very lucky in 1998 to go to a meeting with an old friend that I'd worked with in the past, a woman called Kathy Rogers, who came up with this daft idea of getting two teams of engineers to build machines out of rubbish in a scrapyard and make them work. And it was an enormous risk that this show wouldn't work. And thankfully it did, and I thought we'd do it for one season and that'd be the end of it, and 10 years later I realised I was very wrong. An enormously successful show, but through doing that I came into contact with an enormous amount of really brilliant engineers, not only the ones you saw on screen, but the people we had as consultants behind the scenes. And all the time we were doing that, there was this background drumbeat that I didn't really understand to start with, that was about changing the way we move things and the way we power things and how we power them. And a lot of people that were involved in early development of renewables and offshore wind and solar and batteries, and I was going, what's it? The most boring thing in the world is a battery. If you can think of a kind of beautiful old steam engine with brass pipes and pistons and valves and hissing and coal that you throw underneath, and it's got a fire and it makes steam and it goes, and you can polish things and it's got adjustment knobs. That's fantastic. And then you look at a battery, it's like, who's going to be interested in that? It's so dull. And I spent my childhood going around museums with my mum. I went around a lot of stately homes as well, which I love. But when I saw a kind of a Victorian beam engine or early steam engines, I was just really obsessed with all that stuff. And it's a very intrinsic understanding of the internal combustion engine. My brother has worked in motor racing in one form or another his entire career. I'll talk about him later because that's been a remarkable change. But that was very much my life, and electric, I didn't even think about it. And then it was while we were making Scrap Heap Challenge in the United States. We did 3 series from the United States, 4 series. We made a British version there one year, but then we made an American version which is called Junkyard Wars. And I'll just do a very bit of anecdotage. It's very short, but I did actually get paid an embarrassing amount of money one day to stand on the top of a pile of busted up American cars in a costume with dancers dancing around the floor beneath me, dressed as engineers. I didn't know engineers had a specific dress code. That was jumpsuits with knee pads and helmets. But they were dancers, and they were doing a really good routine. Around the bottom there were smoke machines, there were glitter guns, glitter cannons, there was rockets going off, and a great big arm, a camera on a huge arm swung round towards me, and I had to say, this was my line, in Britain, it's a challenge. In America, it's a war. And I wasn't allowed to do that face at the end, because that's what I wanted to do. So in America it was called Junkyard Wars, and this was at the time of the Iraq Challenge, which we were quite involved in. So it was all, that was slightly awkward. Anyway, it was enormous fun working there, so we had a huge scrapyard. I think it was a couple of thousand acres of scrap cars in Ventura County, in the valley, where all the pornography is made. So they got scrap at one side and pornography at the other. It's a lovely place to spend time. And, but we had an amazing time there, and it was really one night after we'd finished filming. But we did very long days on that show. One of the crew gave me a lift home, and I was living in West Hollywood, and it was all very lovely. And I was given a lift home at night, so I got in this very unremarkable Japanese car, and it moved off. It was actually on Sunset Boulevard when I first noticed that we were sitting at the traffic lights, and I thought, I didn't want to say anything. I was embarrassed. I didn't know this person very well, the young woman that was driving me, and I said, there was no noise, and I was kind of going, because it was very quiet, it was late at night, there was not much traffic, and then suddenly the lights changed and the car just went, and I was like, how did you do that? Because I thought there was some like new bit of stuff in Los Angeles that no one told me about, which is like a hook that hooks on your car to start it moving. I mean, it just felt so weird, and that was a Prius. That was the very first model Prius. That was year 2000, I think. And I didn't know what it was, and so we drove back to outside my apartment, and she let me out, and I said this, I was a man in middle-aged to a married man with 2 children, middle-aged, to I have to say, quite an attractive young woman. I said, can you pop your hood? Which is a completely respectable thing to say to a young woman in America, and she did. She popped her hood for me. And I had to look underneath, because I'd never heard about this. I didn't know. This was the hybrid, you know, the Toyota hybrid thing that we're all used to now. And I'd never seen that before, and I went, why would they do it? And that's really, I think, the spark that got me thinking about this. I think for the previous week that happened, just before that happened, I borrowed one of the crew's cars, because it was such a thrill to be English and to be allowed to drive this thing, and it was a 1968 fastback Mustang. Now, some of the car aficionados in the room will know what that is. Basically, if you're sitting at traffic lights and you go vroom, the whole car twists. It's really cool. Vroom, oh. For some reason, that gives certain men, a certain amount of pleasure. Vroom. Oh my God, it twists really. Vroom. It's extraordinary. So, not exactly an eco-vehicle. I think that car did 8-10 miles to the gallon, and you had to put extra lead and testosterone in the tank to make it run. So it smelt of burnt carbon and socks. But so I wasn't. It was not in my world at all. But then going in that Prius kind of got me thinking. And we then met people who worked on, in fact, on the very one of the engineers we worked with who worked on the very early. It was called the T0, an experimental electric sports car. The drivetrain and some of the battery management then went on to become the Tesla Roadster. So this was in 2001. And that started to get me thinking about this stuff, because then I realised that electric cars aren't slow, because until then I just thought, like anybody would, disability vehicles, milk floats, forklift trucks, that was electric vehicles, or trams and trains, you know, it wasn't cars with engines that go vroom, you know, you can't do that in an electric car. If you try and rev it up, nothing happens. So that was the kind of spark of it. I then came back to the UK. I traded in a Volkswagen Golf R32. Basically, I've just said I don't know anything about cars, and I've just now mentioned 2 specific makes of car, but these are the only ones I know. For those of you who don't know, and I hope you don't, because it's the most ridiculous car, but a Golf R32, you know, Volkswagen Golf, sensible, small, hatchback car, economic, reliable. And then the R32, utterly stupid footballer's car that is an idiot. It's got more exhausts, it's four-wheel drive, it's got a truck engine in it, it goes like stink, it's stupid. And I traded that in for a Prius. And I think it's the only time in the history of Toyota dealerships that as my R32 was driven away by one of their mechanics, it makes a very good sound. And then a Prius, grey, came in. And the dealer said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" This is a man selling a car to a customer. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mr. Llewellyn?" I said, "Yes, I think so." I'd driven to that dealership in my R32, which my brother had got a friend of his to re-chip. Now, I don't know much about this, but I watched them do it, and they opened this little box under, well, they had to kind of bust seals and things, put a different chip in, and it changed the engine mapping, which meant it was even faster and even less fuel economic, and also destroyed the warranty, which reduced its value by many thousands of pounds. It was the most stupid thing possibly I've ever done. And my brother thinks it's very, very funny, and always reminds me every time I see him. But I drove to the dealership in the R32 at probably 15 to 20 miles to the gallon in a Golf, for goodness sake. And I drove back in a Prius at, I think I got 67 mpg driving in my socks. So I was very excited about, you know, eco driving at the time. And that was really a game-changing experience to do that. And one of the things, I think this is a real crucial thing about cars, and particularly, I think, men and speed and cars and power and all that stuff. At that time, I was driving weekly to Scrap Heap, and it was a journey of 96 miles, just short of 100 miles, I think. And I drove it in the R32 the last week. I had it as fast as I possibly could, maximum acceleration, all points, latest braking you could possibly do before a roundabout like so. Just thrash it every possible moment. I could go as fast as I could, probably almost was nudging the speed limit once or twice in between speed channels. It's a route I knew very well, very early in the morning. Got to work and kept track of the time it took me to get to work. That was my big obsession at the time. And then the next week I drove in the Prius, socks on, super slow, never went above 65, really cruised along, really early braking, letting it get some regen, gentle acceleration out. It took 7 minutes longer. I thought it was going to take an hour longer, so I'd left home earlier. I got to the gates where the scrapyard we were working, there was no one there. I had to sit there for like 3/4 of an hour waiting for the first lad who was the intern. They always send the intern coughing and spluttering early in the morning to open it all up. So the notion that it was that much of a difference, I thought it would be literally, if you drive really, really slowly in a really eco car, it's going to take much longer. It doesn't. Because there's so many myths, and that was the kind of first myth about changing the way we drive. And I think that's an enormous amount of what we're talking about here with electric vehicles, is the perceived notion of the threat to us of changing the technology we use and the actual experience of it. So the notion of range anxiety, which is still used constantly by the media. Every time the BBC mention electric cars, they'll go, well, of course, electric cars, well, you're going to have range anxiety, but they're becoming more popular. Range anxiety was a term coined by the General Motors PR group when they withdrew their first electric car and had it crushed, and introduced the civilian Hummer to the California market. And they go, people don't want electric cars because they'll get range anxiety. Well done, guys, for coming up with that. Range anxiety, if you've never driven an electric car, I guarantee the first time you have a go on one and drive for more than 10 minutes, you will have massive, chronic range anxiety. You may soil yourselves, you will sweat, you may feel nauseous, you will think, I cannot possibly get to that corner 60 meters down there without running out, and literally I'm going to just die because I'll be there for years waiting for it to charge. It's a nightmare, I can't possibly change, I need diesel. That is the feeling you'll get. I first drove a Mitsubishi i-Me from the middle of Birmingham to where I live in the Cotswolds, 60 miles. I was in horror going down the M5 in the slow lane behind the truck, and the truck was going too fast, I can't keep up with it. Oh my God, I've used a bar. I'll not make it. And I was genuinely, I was really nervous. I thought, what am I going to do? I have to bring my wife, she'll have to come and get me. It's going to be, what am I going to do? It's really embarrassing. I've got, this is a car with leaves painted on the side because it's green. This is, oh God, I hate leaves on cars. I mean, leaves, if a leaf falls on a car, that's fine. Or a car called a leaf, that's fine. But that whole notion of it being green used to drive me crazy. But anyway, I got home, it was fine. I've never had range anxiety again. So it's just not a problem. There are loads and loads of problems and challenges with electric cars, but I really don't think range anxiety is one of them. And that was in a car that had a range, at best, as we've discussed, 70 miles. So, I mean, to do 60 miles where the last 5 are up a hill in the Cotswolds was quite a challenge, but it did it. But I think what we'll see now, and what you're seeing outside there, is the absolute beginning first hint that this technology is becoming a viable alternative to combustion engines. And it's, you know, every now and then I have to remind myself, why are we bothering? Why are we bothering to go to all this effort? Like, why can't we just use cars that are normal? You go, those, we've had them for 100 years, they work, they're fine. Why can't we keep doing that? And then you start to look at the energy usage that we have and how efficient machines are, and how really the drive we're looking at is, yes, we need to introduce renewables into our lives, yes, we need to change the way we generate power, but we also need to use it more efficiently. Well, you cannot really design a machine at the moment that is less efficient than an internal combustion engine. They are utterly, chronically pathetic in terms of energy conservation, energy use. So when you put a pound of fuel, pound's worth of money, fuel in a car, it's about 22 pence moves you along the road. The rest is wasted, absolutely wasted. It does not move you. It's wasted in heat, in friction, in all the losses that are in the exhaust pipe and the exhaust system to try and mitigate some of the poisonous gases that are coming out of the back. And, you know, I say this and you go, no, they must be more than 22% efficient. The most efficient internal combustion engines which are phenomenally complicated and compact. Honda have made one that is about 30% efficient, and they're amazingly proud of that. 30% efficient is chronic. It is pathetic. It is tragic, old, dated, Victorian technology. That's how I describe the internal combustion engine. I really, really want lots of passionate people to keep beautiful old petrol cars going. I think it's really important. Where I live in the Cotswolds is a popular route for gentlemen of a certain age with unusual facial hair and driving gloves to take the old Morgan two-seater Tourer or the beautiful D-type Jag. Those have really got to be kept and maintained and loved and polished, buffed, looked after, put in, you know, our neighbour has one of those bags that he puts over his old Alvis, which keeps the damp out, because it's beautiful. I mean, those things are beautiful, and they're like steam trains, they're like amazing old machines that should be kept. 500, 600, maybe 1,000 of those. Really important that we know that we made those things at one time, but the rest of them, and there's no children in here, they're shit. I'm just going to say that. And I mean, I've felt that more and more strongly. If I sit in a traffic jam now in an electric car, I was looking around and going, it's so tragic. It is so stupid. It's such a monstrous waste of fuel. There's thousands of cars sitting still with their engines running. And then some people say, well, I've got stop-start technology, so, you know, I'm pretty eco. No, you're not. I'm sorry. It's a rubbish machine that's massively inefficient, and we need to move on. And I think that's, you know, it's a difficult challenge for everyone. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm not saying that my generation will change. My generation are going to drive diesels literally till they drop. They'll drive petrol cars till they drop. They're not going to change. We hate change. People of my age do not want to change. They don't want to think about it. They're comfortable in the way they are. But I think we will see enormous changes, and I think we'll see them much, much faster than, for instance, our government predict 2040. It doesn't matter. It's good that they said, let's change it by 2040. Because it kind of gives people a bit of a guideline to think, oh yeah, that's loads of miles away, and carry on driving the Range Rover Sport. I think it will happen much faster as the generation who are now, say, in their late teens, early 20s, reach their 30s. They won't ever buy an internal combustion engine car. And more importantly, I think it's becoming increasingly clear, particularly in the automotive industry, they won't buy a car. They won't buy a new car. Why would you buy a car that sits still doing nothing for 90% of the time you own it? It is the most absurd, ludicrous and inefficient way of using that investment. It is daft. It doesn't make sense. So the only figure I've ever heard from the automotive industry that's confirmed every time, it doesn't matter who I talk to, is the 90-91, which is 90% of cars are not in use 90% of the time. And yes, it's convenient to know, well, I've got my car here and I can use it whenever I want. Of course, that is very, very convenient. But it is an enormous investment that you're not using. And is it not more wise that even if you do own a car, when you're not using it, someone else is? And then you think, well, I don't want other people in my car. This is my personal space. And I think that's where we'll see the change, is that the cars will be designed so that they're less your personal space, or as you get in, it becomes your personal space. We've seen examples of that where you get in a car and the lighting changes and the colours change and the look of it changes, and you set that up and it knows you because it's read your eyes. There's another thing I'll get to in a minute about the fourth wave, and it knows who you are because it can sniff your DNA or insert something up your back passage. You know, there's going to be some terrifying technology, particularly for gentlemen, I'm sure. Do you want to drive the new Ford Prostate? So it gives you a check as you're driving. Oh. Maybe that was what the Ford Probe was. My children's headmaster had a Ford Probe. I always thought he was a bit dodgy. Sorry. No, there's no children on there. No, sorry. I won't go rude. Oh, is there one there? Oh my God, I can't see. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
He's heard worse from me.
I see, okay. Thank goodness for that. Oh, Lord. I think she's very well hidden there.
Yes.
Is she on her phone?
She's on her iPad.
She's on the phone. I haven't been talking, just ignore me. I'm just an old bloke. I'm going to say some real filth in a minute. Just keep one in. No, I won't. Anyway, so, sorry, I've gone completely off topic there. So, just to give some background of how I ended up here, which is quite mysterious to me as much as everything else. I've only driven electric cars for the last 8 years. I have a Nissan Leaf, the original one, which I got in 2011. It's done 63,000 miles. It just changed the other day, and it's scratched, dented. It's got chicken poo on it. It's the interior. I've just had it cleaned actually. I had proper men do proper cleaning of it because it was disgusting. It was obscene. It should have been condemned. It's not been looked after. It's been scratched down the side. We live in the rural area, and when you pull over to let a Range Rover go past at 90 miles an hour the other way, I drive into the hawthorn hedge, so the sides all scratched. I've got a massive dent at the front, big dent at the back, which was intriguing with reversing cameras, which really help drivers reverse. And I could see in my rear view camera, beautifully crisp, high definition picture, a boat. I could see it. It was in a yard, and there was a boat there. And there's a boat trailer with a hook that I couldn't see. Oh, it's got a trailer with a big hook. So there's a nice dent in the back. But it's just passed its MOT. It's had new tyres since I've had it. I think 5 new tyres, because I had 2 punctures. It's had a new rear wiper blade. It's had screen wash, and I got told off because I was using fairy liquid and water. I was so angry at buying screen wash because it's so expensive. I mean, that's about 200 miles range in at full price electricity for a bottle of screen wash. You're kidding, I'll use a bit of fairy. That blocks up the nozzles, so the man had to unblock the nozzles when it didn't work. So I said, no, the screen wash doesn't work. And he went, yeah, it's because you block your nozzles, you tutter. So I've had to buy screen wash, and it's had, I was trying to think, in that period, so how many years since 2011? It's 7. 7 years, 62,000 miles, 63,000, and £135 on servicing. And I think this is the key message in that time, is that economics will win the argument. So people can say, oh, well, I don't think electric cars are ready. There isn't the charging infrastructure. There isn't I need one to be able to drive to Scotland like that at any time, 24 hours a day. I need to be able to do that. I need to tow a 72-ton caravan up a mountain. I need that, or electric cars are rubbish, and I won't even look at them. And I go, please, please, stick with the dirtiest diesel engine you can, but you do need a huge truck. You know, there are arguments that are given, and they're pure, they're nothing to do with technology, they're purely psychological. I need to be able to drive to Scotland. I drove to Scotland in one day in this Nissan Leaf about 4 years ago in the winter, like an idiot, with a brilliant engineer that had wired the whole thing up with battery temperature monitors and range stuff and everything, and how many kilowatts we were using per mile. It was the most stupid journey I've ever done in my life, because it's a really long way. It doesn't matter what car you're in, it's a really long way. We did. I think we charged it 8 times, rapid charges on the way up, and we were very lucky because we had Twitter followers who were going to the chargers before we got there and making sure they were available so we could go in and charge. And it was exhausting. But you can do it if you want to. Well, that was in a 24 kilowatt hour leaf. Well, now you could do it in 3 charges in a leaf. You could do it in 1 charge in a Tesla. And you've got to stop. There's all these sort of myths about how we drive. The average speed when you're driving along motorways in this country is 52 miles an hour. That's what your average speed is. Well, that means if you drive 300 miles, that's 6 hours. There's no other place in your life that you sit down in one position for 6 hours. It's really bad for you. And once you reach a certain age as a gentleman, you will realise that the far more anxiety you get than range is bladder anxiety. And my bladder range is now, I reckon it's healthy for a man my age. I think it's 180 miles. I can do boom, rock hard. I can do 180 miles on one bladder. But there's a lot of cars already that exceed my bladder range. There's no way I can drive as far as my Tesla. My Tesla will beat me every time. I'm absolutely busting. I'm sure there's some gentlemen here that I've got to talk to a doctor about this. When I was young, I can remember driving on motorways and being desperate for a wee. I was really aware of the desperate need and I was waiting for the services so I'd get running. Now, I'm not at all desperate until I stand up. As soon as I get out of the car, oh my God! And I think it's like a hose. You know, when you bend a hose, it's got a kink in it. It's got to be that. Something's happened. As I'm not aware of it when I'm sitting down. I'm completely relaxed. Oh, I'll stop here and maybe get a coffee. Ah! Running, screaming. Embarrassing. So I spent a lot of time trying to sort of trying to explain the myths of the fears of changing the technology. I think the really exciting stuff that's happening is sharing. There's this thing I've just read recently, let me do this, this is the 4 waves that the human race has been through, which I like this, and I think I got some of it wrong. I wrote these notes down really quickly, I was watching a talk. The first wave, pretty obvious, was agriculture, writing and recording our history. The first wave of change in human history. We're going 10,000 years back. The second wave was organised nation states, and therefore wars. We did that for a long time. Tens of thousands of wars we had that we don't even know about. The third wave was obviously the Industrial Revolution, was mass production, electricity generation, that change that happened, say, 150 years ago. And this is the prediction, is the fourth wave will be robots, autonomous intelligent machines, the sharing economy, mass migration and climate change, just to balance it up. So it's not all good. And we're experiencing quite a few of those things already, and the disruptive effect. So each of those things have been huge disruptions to what was the natural order before. So clearly hunter-gatherers stopping and start farming, that's a real big change to the human race. It was a big change to our biology, to the illnesses we got because we were in one place, we developed new illnesses. All those changes have often resulted in big disruptive changes to the way we live. And I think it's not just electric cars, but electric cars are the spur to a really, really fundamental and disruptive change to the way our economy works. You know, there's a huge, well-entrenched infrastructure supporting fossil fuels, world trade, ships, all those things. It's a really big change. If this country stopped importing crude oil from Saudi Arabia, that would really change things. Not all for the good. Mostly for the good, I would argue, but not all for the good. It's going to really affect the way we operate. You know, so it is a disruptive technology in the same way that mobile phones were, in the same way that the internet was, in the same way that fridges were. They changed a lot of things. Mark mentioned this morning Tony Sieber's book. I saw him talk in Amsterdam earlier this year. He's an amazing guy. If you get the chance, his talks are on YouTube. I'm mildly sceptical about some of the things he says, but it is a remarkable argument he makes, and his talk opens with a picture of New York City in, I think it's 1904, and there's a picture of this, wide picture of this street, and there's thousands of horse-drawn buggies, and in the corner you can just see, and he highlights it, there's a car, one car. And then he jumps forward 10, 12 years, same street, very similar picture, and there's thousands of cars and there's one horse, and it took 12 to 13 years for that. Well, if you think about that industry that supported hundreds of thousands, if not millions of horses being used as a transport system, and the tens of thousands of people whose jobs depended on that, And that disruption happened in an incredibly short time, much greater than we're experiencing now in terms of jobs. So saddlers, feed merchants, blacksmiths, all those, and the hundreds of people. Though I think it was somewhere around 10,000 people in London whose job it was digging shit up. Well, the reason they had to, the pressure was on to stop horses was because London was knee deep in horse manure. My daughter had a pony. I have to admit this. She was a member of the pony club, and we had a horse box, and we'd go to the pony club. And I'd just start speaking like that, and then I really didn't stand out. I just let it in. Hello, Robbie, how are you doing? Oh, isn't Holly doing well in the jumps? So humiliating. She loved it. She was very happy, and it was a lovely pony. But let me tell you, you put a pony in the back of a horse box for half an hour, it's full of shit. It's amazing. It's amazing how much they produce. We had lovely roses, they're still growing in it now. It's very useful. I actually keep it in buckets. It's tons of it. God, they don't know how to pump it out. So you imagine like 500,000 horses on the streets of London would have been, the smell would have been unimaginable in the summer. So that was a huge improvement. But now you go into London and the smell is absolutely appalling, but it's diesel. And that's the next big change. And so I'm rattling all over the place. I would actually really like to, if there's, when have I got to finish? Yeah, I've got a bit more time. If there's some questions, because that might be clearer if you want to ask some questions. But I just want to tell you about Fully Charged. And I want to tell you about the BMW i3 advert. That was a really important clue. So when the BMW i3 was introduced, I went to the launch and they showed a film. And I thought, why are they showing this as a Greenpeace film? Because it had the world, and it had loads of like little images of people, and it had a really deep, sort of meaningful Greenpeace voiceover. In 2020, the world's population will be 7 million, and they all live in cities. Shots of cities where they do that high speed with all the traffic going like that. And there's too many people. Oh, no, here we go again, the old too many people argument. And we cannot make cars for all of them. Oh. And there's too many cars, there's not enough room in our cities for cars. So what are we going to do? Cut to BMW i3 driving along a completely empty city street, as they always do in adverts. And then there's someone behind him who's a confident, slim young man who's driving his electric car. And then he drives it and it parks in a row of cars. It's a car sharing car, it's not his car. He gets out of it and leaves it, he walks away. And it's what BMW were hinting, and this is, when did the i3 come out? 5 years ago? Yeah, so they were saying, we're not making cars for people to buy, we're making cars for people to drive. We're going to be selling miles, not models, was the argument. Which I think was very, very interesting, because it honestly, look, the first 5 minutes of that advert, you would not be surprised if it said, Greenpeace, cycle, don't drive. That would be what you'd expect, and it actually was a BMW car advert. It was very interesting. But, now I'll just quickly mention Fully Charged. I'm assuming some of you might have seen it. I'm assuming some of you would probably rather tear your eyeballs out and watch it, but it's a channel on YouTube that's about electric cars and the future of energy and transport. It's been going for 8 years now. In the beginning of 2016, we had 10,000 subscribers, which I thought was amazing, that many people had subscribed, and probably a million views a year. We now have over 300,000 subscribers. We have about 2.5 million views a month. And last weekend, but before last, we had our first live show where I personally was quaking, praying for 2,000 people to come along and come and see what we were doing, because it was going to be embarrassing if it was only 8 people and one man with a Nissan Leaf and a funny hat who was telling me how many kilowatt hours it really does store, and all the millions, you think. Not that there's very few electric car drivers like that, but there's one or two. Robert, I think you'll find you're wrong about the mileage. I'm sorry, yes, I know. Just slightly more than 7,000 people came through the door, which was really extraordinary. It was a phenomenal event, really, and a really friendly, supportive thing, and it really showed, and you could say it was because they all wanted to see the old bloke that used to be in the rubber suit. It really wasn't. It was because they're really interested in the topic. It was really, we had a lot of cars like you have here, and a lot of people who do products for the home, for vehicle-to-grid chargers, home chargers, solar panels, water heaters, all that stuff. And they all had enormous interest. There's a phenomenal demand for this, and at the moment there's a terrible lack of supply. There's not enough electric cars, as opposed to there's no demand for them, there is too much demand for them. And as one of the speakers there said, the guy from Hyundai, he said, you've got to remember that a car company is a capitalist company, and if we've got a product that there's more demand than supply, for us, that's a really good thing. He didn't get a cheer for that. He got a sneer from everybody. Oh, hurry up, mate. But so that show has grown enormously, and we try and cover as many. We've driven every single electric car that's commercially available and some weird ones. But we try and cover the whole range of it. I'm really, really keen to come back to Nottingham because what I've been hearing today about what's going on in this city, you're really blessed. Your city council are doing things that I've heard other city councils talk about. I've seen presentations from other city councils around the country. What we intend to do by 2035 is introduce a fully electric bus. And I just want to go back to them and go, yeah, Nottingham, how many have you got?
58.
Yeah, I want to go, Nottingham, we've got 58, mate. Pull your finger out, 58! I mean, that's amazing. That's almost like Shanghai, although I think they have 40,000, don't they? But anyway. It's a bigger city. It's a bigger city. You can't compare. Your trams are amazing. The taxis, the fact that those taxis, which I assumed were for London, and I've seen a couple of them in London now, they are starting to arrive. You've got them here already. You've got an amazing electric car charging network. You've got, it's just incredible what you're doing here, and I'm really, really impressed with it. And the building developments that have solar built in and storage built in, and you've got big solar farms with batteries, all that stuff is what we're talking about. So we're definitely going to come to do the fully charged Nottingham special. I want to have a ride on a tram. I've never been on a Nottingham tram. So I'm hoping to go and ride on a tram.
You can drive it. Yeah.
I can't, no, do not let me drive it. Oh my God. There are limits. I don't know, some of you may... Oh God. I'll stand next to you while you drive it. Some of you might have seen, I did a BBC programme about the Mumbai suburban rail network with Dan Snow and Anita Rani a few years ago, where the reason that I said yes, because I'm a bit cynical about doing old-fashioned telly, was because they said you will get to drive an Indian train. And I went, and then my agent was going, darling, are you happy with the fee? I said, screw the fee, darling, I'm going to drive a train. So I drove a train in a town called, I've got to remember it, because no one goes there, no Western tourists go to this town. No, it's gone, sorry, old age. Little town right in the middle, sort of geographically in the centre of India. It took 9 hours on a train to get there. It was an amazing experience. I wasn't driving the train that took us there. So I was on a side track, a branch line, and a beautiful, funny, such a funny guy, just cracked me up all the time. He was such a scream, who was my driving instructor, who was telling me how to operate it very clearly, and I could understand it. I'll tell you, the easiest thing in the world, anyone can do it, is starting a train to move. It's a doddle. You let off the air brake, you hear that, and you push that lever out and it starts moving. That's all you do. It goes dun 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 dun. That's great. And you're going along, and there's the track you can see out the window. The phone rings. My instructor starts talking in Hindi on the phone like mad. We've got a cameraman and everybody in there, and our Indian guide. And the Indian guy started laughing because he was getting a shopping list from his wife that he was going to pick up on the way home. And I'm going along and I can see a cow on the track. This is not a word of a lie, there's a cow, and then behind the cow, when the cow moves, a child. And I'm in front of I think it was a 3,000-ton train, because all the carriages behind it, and I don't know how to stop it. And I go, where's the brake? And he's like, I don't know, like that. I didn't kill the child or the cow, but that's why I don't want to drive a tram, and that would be too embarrassing. I did learn how to stop it. But when you put the brakes on really hard, I did an emergency stop. It takes about 1.5 miles to stop, so it's not quick. And then I've got to tell you one last bit, because then we went back, and then the idea was that I stop at a station. They had a platform there that wasn't in use, and I stopped 1.5 miles before it. And I was really kind of going, oh my God, where is it? I'm not going to stop in time. Train drivers are really clever. I don't know how you do it. I can understand how you get them going. That's a doddle. How you stop it where it's meant to stop is totally mysterious. It's really, maybe the trams aren't as hard, aren't they? Okay, yeah, they are. They're really, really skilled. But I think, is it all right to do questions and answers? Is that okay with you? Yeah. I'm very sure I won't have the answer, but I think you might have an interesting question. Has anybody got a mildly interesting question they'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
So in 2040, Theresa May is going to make internal combustion engines legislating that now. And the main reason being that the knock-on costs of healthcare from the pollution in all these cities is affecting them, and it's cheaper for them to change.
Yeah.
So, for a country like this, where obviously we can afford the healthcare, why wait so long?
Oh, so why make that date
Yeah,
so
I mean,
long? Yeah.
it's obviously not. It's going to cost us very little to change.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's got nothing to do with technology, the rate of speed of change of technology, or reality. I think it's to do with it's a political stance. So and I don't think it's bad. I think it's good that a Western government in a privileged nation like this country is saying that this is where we're going to change, and it certainly sends a signal to manufacturers, to the oil industry, to everybody that this is coming, and that there's government backing for it. And I would think it's cross-party. I don't think there'd be another party that came about going, no, we're going to defend it. I mean, there's a certain politician at the other side of the Atlantic who would say, I'll defend the internal combustion engine till the end of time and introduce coal burning. But economics will just, his arguments are so tragic, and economics will defeat them without question on that particular issue. But I don't quite know why the government said 2040. I think it was to be really safe. So they will be lobbied hard by big car manufacturers, by big oil companies, to prolong it as long as they can, because they're doing everything they can to stop it. I mean, they do spend actual money. It's recorded, it's provable that the automotive industry and the oil industry in particular spend actual money planting stories that will just sow a little bit of doubt, range anxiety, batteries are going to throw them away, that will melt the grid, we need 5 new Hinkley Point Cs. All those stories are coming out of the oil industry, and they don't do them directly. It's not a crude thing where they buy an advert, they pay a blogger, they pay someone to do it, to comment and comment and comment. It's not going to work, it's not going to work. It's how they delayed asbestos use, how they delayed smoking. It's the same people, the actual same individuals are being paid to delay and delay. They know it's going to happen, but they delay and delay until they've cleared their inventory of diesels. That's why if you go into a sales room now, and I've had this anecdotal evidence to a degree where it's undeniable, people go into a Renault showroom, a Nissan showroom, a BMW showroom to say, I really want to buy an electric car, and the guy will say, they're not really ready yet, but this diesel is really good. Because he gets a massive cut when you buy a diesel, and he gets sod all when you buy an electric car. And that's really got to change. And Tom, who's sitting there, the company he works for, yes, they've been bought by BP, but they opened a showroom where they're not selling you a car, but you can see an electric car and actually find out what they're really like. And it's such a brilliant thing they've done. So it is going to happen. It's going to happen way before 2040. 2040, people I think will look back and go, isn't that sweet that they did that 2040 thing? And then there will be children, and you just think of it for a moment, there will be children not born yet who will say to their grandparents, I'm hoping I'll last long enough to be one, Granddad, did you really sit in a metal machine with a wheel and if you steered it like that you could kill people, with a pedal that made it stop and a pedal that made it go, and when you made it go, explosions happened inside a metal box that produced poisonous gas out of a fuel that was highly explosive. Did you really do that? You go, yes, we did. For 100 years. And they will go, you are weird. It's such an extraordinary thing. And I grew up with internal combustion engines. I stripped my dad's lawnmower engine down to see how it worked, and I couldn't quite put it back together. Which is where I learned quite a lot of Anglo-Saxon terms, because he loved his lawnmower. He eventually donated it to my brother and I, and we built a go-kart with it, and that was brilliant. Briggs Stratton, 4 horsepower, beautiful. Yeah, sweet motor. Yes, sir.
What kind of change would it have to be to change people's mindset on electric cars? But not only that, but changing their home as well. I watched Fully Charged, and I changed everything. I went to a Nissan Leaf, I took out my boiler and everything and replaced it for electric hot water, electric underfloor heating. So I was completely scrapped all fossil fuels. But it's that mindset to go, yes, I can do that, and I've got a year now, and the savings are like over £600 within half a year, so it's what will it take to say, right, this is possible for
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've just said there is what it takes. So one of your mates will come around to your house, or your neighbour will hear about it, or your neighbour will see it, or someone over the road goes, that bloke over the road's got a leaf, and he drives it every day, so it hasn't run out yet. and then you know, I mean, there's a very, very posh man, I shouldn't say his name, but a very posh old chap in my village who was, you know, renewables, I mean, there's windmills and gasoline, and it ruined the landscape, and the solar panels are awful. And then he saw my electricity bill. How do you do that? I said, I charge 2 electric cars, I run a house, my daughter's at home from uni, which means the washing machine's on 24 hours a day, the tumble dryer is on. Why is that? I can tell from my app that tumble dryer is on at the moment, and she can hang the washing out the fucking line. I mean, it's been covered by solar, but God. Anyway, and my electricity bill went from about £140 a month in the summer to 7. And that is quite a big difference, and that is solar and a battery in electric cars. Now, that is a big, big change. Now, it's not £7 in the winter, I'm not going to lie. It's quite big in the winter. But for between April and sort of mid-April to mid-October, our usages were about we're over 90% self-generated in the house. So that is generally speaking only 2 of us. But it has to be pointed out, an Australian wife, which means every single light has to be on in the house 24 hours a day. It's so dark in this country, I can't see! On a bright sunny day, she turns all the lights on in the kitchen. Oh God! I mean, since we've had LEDs, it's less physically painful for me, but oh my God, that's painful. I'm clearly going to have to shut up, aren't I? Because we're going to go. Are we all right? Oh no. Oh God, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Stick your hands up. I've got a question.
Yes, at the back, sir.
The way that China's been going with sort of EVs and whatever, I feel that the UK and Europe's in the dark ages. Is there any particular reasoning for that?
The way that, sorry, that...
China is against the way Europe or the UK.
Oh, right.
Lightning is ahead of us.
Yeah.
What is it with that sort of part of the world that's so different from the UK?
I mean, I think it predates anything that's happened recently. They've got an industrial base, which we used to have, we don't anymore. So mass manufacturing, which we used to do, we don't really so much, not to the same extent, which is a great shame. They have a rather difficult political system, so when their political masters say, as they have done recently, if you build a new property that has a parking space in it, they all have to have electric car chargers. Right. And it isn't like a council would do where, well, we're trying to instigate legislation where that happened. It's like, that's the law. If you don't do it, you're going to prison. You know, you'll be fined a huge amount or whatever. So everyone does it. Yeah. And I mean, that, they also had, you kind of got to jump back to when London had the smog and when they brought in the Clean Air Act to compare the air quality in the large Chinese cities. Is catastrophic when it's bad, and I have a brother-in-law that lives there, and he sends pictures from his apartment of this amazing landscape of huge buildings that he sees from his high-rise apartment on a clear day, and another day and it's just a picture of grey. You can't even see the building outside the road. It's so chronic, and he's got breathing masks with filters that they have. That his company, he works for a chemical company, they have to wear them when they go outside. And you think that's not sustainable. For any government is going to eventually get into trouble. So they had to do something, and they just had the power, I think, to say all buses must be electric. And they went from all diesel buses to all electric in a matter of 6 months. I mean, phenomenal change. But they have the manufacturing capacity to do that, to produce those machines, you know, so they're, there's always this thing about those 300,000 electric cars or whatever it is. There are something like 40 million electric vehicles on the road, but 35 million of them are electric scooters in China. You know, that's transformed. I mean, I've seen a video of busy streets in Shanghai, which is just thousands of electric scooters and chaotic charging on the corners where there's charge posts with hundreds of scooters, all with wires hanging over them. But you know, they adapted to it straight away. So I think it's politics a great deal, and I think it's you know, if we finally got rid of democracy and were ruled by President Rees-Mogg, it would happen overnight.
Do you think hydrogen fuel cell has got a future? And
yeah.
What about solid state batteries?
Oh yeah, that was both of those are in my list, and I forgot both of them. Solid state batteries. Just 2 things to say. Volkswagen 40 billion they've just spent, they haven't spent, they're spending on solid-state battery development over the next whatever years. They just bought a solid-state battery company, and Dyson. There was a solid-state battery company who contacted us, and we were going to go and see them, and there was like a little start-up somewhere in Sussex, I think, and they developed this solid-state battery that was really stable and 10 times more energy than that, and then Dyson bought them, and it was really, that door's shut. So Dyson is spending £4 billion in the next 2 years developing electric cars. We might see them probably till the end of next year. No one knows what they're like. I've met one engineer at Dyson who was really sweet because he kept going, because I said, you want to say something? So all he told me was that there's an airfield to the south of the M4, which I can't remember what it's called, which Dyson has bought, which is being developed into a huge factory and testing facility for electric cars. So they're doing them. The Honda Urban EV there's a bit of discussion about they'll have solid-state batteries. Solid-state batteries basically are lighter and smaller and higher energy density and less prone to combustion. So really, there's going to be something that happens in the next 3 years that will utterly propel, so that you'll go into a showroom and you go, you can buy this diesel model, sir. And you go, yeah, but that's 27,000 quid. What about the electric one that's 8,000, that will last longer, go further, is cleaner, will be cheaper to operate and doesn't need servicing? You know, it's a changing model. That's going to happen, I think, in 3-4 years. You know, basically it's over for internal combustion. Hydrogen fuel cells, brilliant. Fantastic technology. There's some amazing new technology coming out for fuel cells in the home that can run off natural gas or hydrogen or whatever it is that produce heat and electricity in your home, a generator in your home. A really, really economic system. Hydrogen fuel cell trucks, buses, diggers, earth movers, tractors. There's some hydrogen fuel cell tractors they're always a combination of batteries and fuel cells, but range extending using hydrogen fuel cell cars. Small passenger vehicles, I'm yet to be convinced. The Mirai that's out there, it's worth having. It's a lovely car, I've driven it, really nice car to drive, goes a long way. The Hyundai Nexo, which is an episode coming next week on Fully Charged, fantastic. I drove it across the breadth of South Korea on one tank, didn't even think about range. It's got a range of 600 miles or something on a tank. Massive battery pack. A lot of people think, hydrogen fuel cells are the future, road batteries are rubbish. Well, a hydrogen fuel cell car won't work without a very big battery pack, because a hydrogen fuel cell takes quite a few seconds to start generating power. So if you were sitting at traffic lights, you put your foot down, nothing would happen for 8-10 seconds until it had built up enough head of steam. But it's brilliant technology. All that comes out the back is water. How you produce it is a debate, because at the moment all commercially available hydrogen is steamed out of natural gas, so it's fossil fuel extract, but in its actual use it's faultless. I just think heavy vehicles, ships, there's development of ships, really big fuel cells. The bigger and heavier a fuel cell is, the cheaper it is to make. So to compress one down to a small, lightweight size to fit in a small passenger car is an expensive process with very rare materials still. But it's the same with batteries. Someone's going to come up with a way of doing it. There's enormous investment going into it. So I wouldn't write off any form of hydrogen fuel cell. Really, the only advantage is, which is where they are attractive to people who've never driven a battery electric car, is, you can fill it in 4 seconds. Well, you can't. You can fill it in about 5 minutes, but much quicker than a battery. But there's a lot of other complex stuff. It's a far more complex machine than a battery electric car, just in terms of moving parts and stuff. Should we do one more question? Yes, sir.
2 points. One of them, we talked about range anxiety and we had charge off to the network. My understanding is that when you described the horses and the car comparison in New York, that one of the things that they were worried about when cars proliferated was how are you going to refuel them?
Yes.
And I gather that Henry Ford himself encouraged people to set up businesses that sold coal and barbecue stuff along the roadside, and petroleum spirit as well.
Yeah.
And that's why we still buy barbecue and coal
from a garage. I hadn't heard that particular thing.
and the other one is, you talked about older people not accepting change. We bought it from this Emily. A couple of months later, one of our friends at church, who's in his 60s, if not 70s, described it as a superannuated milk float, until he went for a test drive, and now he calls it a poor man's Tesla because he bought one.
No, I think there's always wonderful exceptions of us lot who have been a very lucky generation. The thing my brother pointed out is that he and I are the first, he's done family trees, first generation of males that have got to our age without being in a war, which we're extremely lucky, you know, as in a national conflict that everyone was involved in. Because our father, grandfather, great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather all fought in wars, which was a quite chilling realisation. But the other thing you said, the first point you made, I've forgotten exactly that. Oh yeah, I mean it's just a very quick thing because it's always helped me remember. Thomas Edison, light bulb, etc., has a lovely mansion in New Jersey. If you're ever in New Jersey, it's open to the public, it's a museum, and in the garage there is a car charging home charger, which would weigh about 3 tons, and there's a great big sort of sheet of steel with brass fittings on it and a big cable covered in cloth, which he charged his electric Model T Ford from batteries in the basement, lead acid batteries in the basement, a wind turbine in the back that generated electricity. This is 1908, and the reason I can remember it is because the building is called Llewellyn Mansion, so it's been very easy for me. So if you Google Llewellyn Mansion, but there is some wonderful kit there. So he and Henry Ford thought that the cars would be electric. Henry Ford did actually make electric Model Ts, that was the other little fact around that time of horses and stuff. I think it was about 1908. There were 600 mechanical taxis in Manhattan. They were all electric. There were battery swap stations in Soho and 125th Street. There were buildings that the taxis could drive in. They pushed a wooden box full of lead acid batteries out one side and push a new one that was charged in, and they drive off again. And they could do it they had races, they could do it in under 30 seconds. They had street charges, something like 80 street charges. But here's the really genius thing I want to see someone else do. There's a fantastic picture that if you Google long enough you'll find, which is a whole row of taxis that look really weird. They look like they're all smashed into each other. Well, they actually are. So there's a guy in New York talking about this. The first taxi would get to the charger and he'd plug this huge brass thing in the front which would clip in, and that would charge the batteries in his car. Another taxi could come up behind him. There's only one street charger, come up behind him. And at the back of his car there were 2 prongs, which then went into the slots in the front of his car. So they literally go, ka-choom, they join it, then his car would be charging. Well, there's a picture of like a load of cabbies standing there, about 18 cars in a row, and they're all charging off one charger. But I just want to hold that cloth-covered copper. You know, you can imagine, it's just terrifying. But that was going on until 1908, and the reason that was recorded was because that was the year they first introduced a gasoline-powered taxi, which was banned in the first day because it was broke down and the backfiring terrified the horses. And its gasoline was stored in an upturned glass demijohn that was held on the back with a leather strap. So that was early days so it's all down to Charles F. Kettering, if you were interested. Charles F. Kettering who made electric motors for Henry Ford, invented the starter motor. That changed the whole thing, but I'm going to shut up now. Go outside in the sunshine and look at the nice electric cars, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Luckily, I don't have to follow that, but I do have to thank you very much for coming. I know there are many EV drivers in the room, but thanks to today, I think there will be many more. Many thanks for coming. Have a great day.